tardes. Bienvenidos a una sesión más del Seminario de Migración, Desigualdad y Políticas Públicas. El día de hoy nos acompaña Michael Clemens. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you.
Michael Clemens es fellow del Center for Global Development, un think tank en Washington. Michael Clemens es economista y ha trabajado mucho el tema de, diría yo, migración y desigualdad, por lo que estamos muy contentos de que esté aquí. Sobre todo enfocándose en los efectos de la migración, los efectos económicos de la migración. So, Michael, it's really exciting to have you here because you're one of the proponents of considering migration as a way for reducing global inequality. So in the seminar, we're really interested in ways of first understanding how migration can reduce or increase inequality, but also in ways for reducing inequalities. So in a sense, your work has put together these two main questions that we have, and you're suggesting that mobility can be a way for reducing not only inequality, not only local, but global. So can you please explain us what you mean when you say that labor migration can reduce inequality, global inequality?
Yes, it is one of the most effective ways to reduce global inequality, and I say that based on one of the most remarkable facts about the world, I think, that comes from the work of the economist Branko Milanovic. The question he asks is, how far can he get toward guessing how much money you make, you, Claudia, based on one piece of information and nothing else, and that is the country you live in. And the amazing answer that he documents very rigorously is 60%. He can get 60% of the way towards a perfect guess about how much money you make, real income, based only on what country you live in, knowing nothing else about you, whether you're woman, man, smart, dumb, rich parents, poor parents, everything else about you. And that's just mind-blowing, and I really think that especially students should think very hard about what that means. This is something very important. Your real income determines your ability to reach your dreams, to make a future for your kids, in many countries to survive. And what Milanovic is saying is not just that the country you live in is more important than anything else about you. He's saying that the country you live in is more important than everything else about you put together. And that means that there is just a tremendous inequality of opportunity in the world based only on where you are. And that comes from another amazing fact about the world, which is that your productivity as a worker, in strictly economic terms, can change hundreds of % just stepping across a border. The same guy hammering the same nail into the same board in Sonora, in purely economic terms, is worth 3 or 4 times as much just stepping across into Arizona. And there's nothing else like that in Mexico, in Haiti, in any country in Africa that can provide so much economic opportunity in such a huge measure so immediately. No education project, no micro-enterprise project, no redistribution project that can offer that much opportunity to somebody who's very poor that quickly.
So, I mean, how you frame this last issue is whether the productivity of someone comes from who you are or where you work. And you just said that it comes from where you're working.
Mostly.
Mostly. Yeah. But there are many reactions against making you more productive, in the sense that, blocking mobility and blocking migration. And some people might say, well, if everybody moves, which is not going to happen, and you've written and you've said, like, wait, not everyone will move, but there would be this reaction like, well, if everybody goes and changes to places where they can be more productive and where they can actually earn more, where productivity might decline, right? You might say there is a turning point or a threshold for this to happen. What would that be? I guess we are really far from that threshold, but how can we think of a point where migration can actually make this happen?
It's certainly possible. You can imagine ways that it could happen. But as you said, the numbers are important here. How far are we away from that? by far the normal thing in the world is to stay where you're born. 97% of the population of the world lives in the country they're born in. Migrants only add up to something like 3.1% of the global population. So it's really a very rare thing to do at a global level. And when people say, you know, the emigration from any particular country is just going to permanently erode its social institutions or its trust in people or give people this dejected feeling about the country they come from, I look at historical experience. So I think of Sweden, which is the #1 country on the Human Development Index right now. It's hard to think of how a country could be more developed in social, economic, health, etc. terms. And between roughly 1860 and 1914, about a quarter of Sweden left Sweden. Sweden had a big demographic bulge when its child mortality started to fall in the 1880s, 1890s. Huge wave of immigration. In the US and Canada, a lot of them came to Minnesota, Saskatchewan. And if you were going to see long-term negative consequences of immigration anywhere, it would be in a setting like that, from what was quite a poor country at the time, just really depopulating certain parts of it. And are they saying that if that had been prevented, then somehow Sweden would be more developed today? I think it's not an unreasonable concern, but I think looking at historical evidence is a better place to start than hypothetical fears.
I mean, many people here in Mexico think that emigration was the last resource for many, right? That many of the economic opportunities should have been here at home, and that in a sense, migration is just like a negative outcome. So how would you convince all these people that it was not a negative outcome, that there are other factors that might bring into place? Because I would say that just as there are many reactions against immigration in the United States, for example, here in Mexico, we also have a lot of people that think that immigration should not happen, right? Should not occur. That conditions in Mexico should be good enough for Mexicans to stay.
Absolutely. That is the ideal world. The question is, what could make that happen? And if we're thinking about economic development, it is inherently a very long-term process. There are places that it has happened very rapidly over a generation or two. The pretty small nation of South Korea is a great example of that. But there is nobody in the world, no matter what they tell you, who knows how to do that systematically for a sizable country. And the reason that my ancestors came from southern Germany in 1846 to the United States, 6 generations ago, is because at that time you could multiply your wages by about 4 by moving from southern Germany to the United States and doing very simple things. The guy who, my great-great-great-grandfather was a livestock tender, and he earned way more. Was that because of some failure of economic policy in Germany at the time? You hear populist politicians in the U.S. talking about, why are we taking the migrants from these failed countries? So Sweden was a failed country in 1890. Germany in 1840 was a failed country. Ireland was a failed country in 1830. It's not that they're failed countries. It's just that development takes quite a long time. Those countries weren't always rich. They did get rich, but over many, many generations. Mexico has been getting richer over many, many generations and is going to get even richer. These are things that take a long time. It's not in the control of any politician to say, well, how about if we just triple GDP next year? No politician has the tiniest idea how to do that.
Yes.
Donald Trump will tell you I can cause 4% growth in the United States. Neither he nor anyone else in the United States knows how to just cause 4% growth there. So the economic disparities between countries really reflect vastly less about the competence of politicians and much more about very, very long-term processes of economic development. And if we're talking about some of the major source countries of migration in the decades to come, especially sub-Saharan Africa, absolutely nobody has any idea how to roll into sub-Saharan Africa and create jobs for all 800 million new sub-Saharan African labor force participants that there are going to be in the next 30 years. I just want to repeat that. Sub-Saharan Africa is going to add 800 million new workers over the next 30 years. that's 24 times the current size of the labor force of the United Kingdom is going to be the growth in the labor force. And some expert in Washington or Brussels thinks that they know how to create 800 million jobs in Ethiopia and Niger. They can certainly do things to help. Foreign assistance and trade agreements are a great way to help give people alternatives to migration. But migration is always going to be an alternative for many people, as it has been for many Mexicans, to make their lives and their family lives better.
So let me go back to this idea of migration and development,
Yes.
because it's something that you've worked a lot, but here in Mexico we discuss a lot as well, with the effect of remittances, with the effect of the brain drain. But how do you see that playing out in the future, or even today, in a changing context where, as you said, these processes take time, right? Has anything happened, changed in the recent years from the discussion, and how do you see this happening now?
So I never use the term brain drain just because it's inherently a pejorative term. It defines skilled migration as to be something bad. You know, if I said, "Oh, your country is experiencing a drain," that's never going to be good news.
But I mean, I would say I agree with you that I mean, just to interrupt, I agree with you that it's a pejorative term. But here in Mexico, we still have this idea.
Yes.
Because we are a traditional country of immigration, right? So this idea of we are losing our people and we're losing good people, we're losing human capital, I think it's still in our brains and discourses, and not in academia, but outside of academia, this idea of a loss.
A loss, yeah. Absolutely.
The idea of a loss.
No, and that makes perfect sense. The thing that I question is whether the migration of skilled people itself is a cause of underdevelopment. And here, this sounds like semantics, but really we're getting to the heart of the issue here. If people say skilled people leaving Mexico is a cause of poverty in Mexico or corruption in Mexico or any other problem in Mexico, they are saying that if nothing else changed, but we just stopped by force those skilled people from leaving, then things would somehow get better in Mexico. And that's an incredibly strong claim. I've never seen any evidence for that anywhere. I've never seen any evidence that keeping smart kids in Chiapas and denying them the opportunity to come work in Mexico City or study at Colmex is going to make things better in Chiapas. I've never seen any evidence that preventing people from leaving East Germany or North Korea made conditions better there. I've never seen any evidence that preventing smart black kids from poor neighborhoods in the United States from getting jobs outside their neighborhoods would somehow make things better in those neighborhoods. And you know, I often say this to people, and they say, "Well, no, I wasn't talking about forcing anybody." But if we're saying that skilled migration is the cause of those problems, then we are in fact saying that if that changed but nothing else changed, meaning the reasons they're choosing to leave didn't change, and that means that we're talking about coercion, because if you don't change the reason somebody's doing something, but you change their decision, you're doing that by force, then we're going to cause development. And really, I think we need to look at the reasons people are leaving. And it is one of the reasons that it's very difficult to find a relationship across countries over time between skilled migration and development, any kind of negative relationship, is because there are many, many complex things going on. So skilled migrants have been shown by economists to be the conduit for technology transfer to countries of origin, for inspiring kids to get more education in the countries of migrant origin, for building trade networks to the country of origin, for bringing investment into the country of origin. And all of those things are countervailing forces to the other things that you could think of, that when skilled people are around, they are also improving institutions they participate in and starting businesses and that sort of thing. We're talking about something very complex, and that's why interceding with some sort of a ban or a limitation, Paul Collier calls for quote-unquote ceilings on skilled migration from poor countries, it can't be expected to have some positive impact. So that's what I would urge people in Mexico to consider, is if they really believe that taking measures to make it harder for skilled Mexicans to go to London, to go to Chicago, to go to Ottawa would somehow benefit Mexico. Do they think that telling the smartest kids of Chiapas that they can't work in DF, would that have a positive net effect on Chiapas? In addition, considering all of the effects and considering the clear negative effects that would have, including practical effects, but also problematic ethical effects. Why should people born in DF get access to opportunities here and people in Chiapas should not?
So how do we manage this skilled migration in a way that we can actually get all these gains?
So one thing I've really advocated for is more international cooperation. There's really, so right now we're in the middle of a renegotiation of the global governance of migration, the biggest since the 1950s. And it came out of the surge of migrants into Germany and other European countries in 2015. There was a large UN summit last fall, September 2016, in which they started working on a new global compact for migration. That's underway right now, and its findings are going to be released next year. And there's a fundamental problem at the heart of those negotiations. And speaking in very broad terms, it is basically that a lot of the traditional migrant destination countries, Germany, the UK, the United States, see their interest as not being served by lower skill migration. As much as they really depend on low skill migration, they politically they don't see their interest as being served by that. On the side of the countries of origin, Mexico, Philippines, tomorrow's countries of origin in sub-Saharan Africa, they're highly suspicious of high-skilled migration, the ones that, the kind that many destination countries want and would prefer migration to be relatively lower skilled. How can you cut through this Gordian knot? I think by bilateral agreements between major origins and destinations in which they agree to share the benefits and costs of skilled migration sensibly and equitably. And that means destination countries need to get directly involved in financing the training and shaping the training of skilled migrants who are going to move prior to migration, benefiting themselves, because in that way they're going to get exactly migrants that fill labor market niches that need to be filled with precisely the very specific skills that are needed when they're needed, especially the skills to integrate quickly and start making fiscal contributions quickly, get employed quickly, everything that they want from migrants. This is an opportunity for mutual gain, but the way it's been happening now is very often that destination countries get skilled migration on the selection side. They pick and choose from among people who are already trained, very often on the public money, and that money comes with them, and that's something that I think many origin countries rightly resent. This is not a problem that can be solved unilaterally.
Now, how do you conceive return migration within this picture of it really matters where you are, the country you're living in, and how productive you are? You mentioned today, when you were talking about the report of shared borders and shared future, the fact that we need to consider the effect that the large amount of deportations might have back in the U.S., right? Back in the labor market in the U.S. We're really interested about what's happening here in Mexico. But in this complex situation where it really matters where you're living, how can we manage return in a way that can assure people to be productive?
That's a very difficult question. This current wave of expatriations, both forced deportations and otherwise, is just an economic lose-lose for both countries. And the fundamental reason for that is that Mexicans who leave Mexico are in general much more similar to other Mexicans than they are to Americans. So when Mexicans leave Mexico, it is much more the case that they are substitutes for workers in the Mexican economy than they are substitutes for workers in the American economy. They go there and generally complement workers in the American economy. both by doing jobs and tasks for which the labor supply of Americans is low, but also by working directly with natives on the job. The reverse of that is a lose-lose proposition. That is, removing by force so many Mexicans from the American labor market is going to hurt the American workers that they complement, not just the capitalists, but the American workers who depend on the firms that are going to be hurt, the farms that are going to be hurt, the small businesses that are going to be hurt. And beyond that, when they come back to Mexico, they are much more similar to other Mexicans than they are to Americans, meaning that they are likely going to substitute.
Yeah.
So Prachi Mishra, a researcher at the IMF, has shown in the past that the emigration of workers from Mexico has caused upward pressure on wages in Mexico, and we can expect the exact opposite to happen under a situation of massive expatriation of Mexicans back into Mexico. You didn't ask about that. You asked about how to manage that situation.
Well, no, but also the effects. I mean, of course, the effects are important. I mean, manage, I guess we need policies of reintegration, but if the salaries are going to be down and pressed down, then I mean, it's not going to be very popular among Mexicans. You don't want to produce new inequalities, right? You don't want to give benefits for returnees and then deprive those who stayed from accessing these programs, right? Because you do, in a sense, you want things to be equitable. So it's not only managed, but it's also considering the effects.
Well, one opportunity, and this is something we were discussing at the conference today in various forms, is that I mentioned that when they left, those workers were much more substitutes for other Mexican workers than they are for American workers. But for many of them, their time in the United States has transformed them. That's most obvious in the case of somebody who went when they're 3 and they grew up speaking English incredibly well and being educated in the American system. But it's also true for workers who went with their education already complete when they're 27, working in construction in the U.S. For decades. You pick up lots of skills because construction is different in the United States than in Mexico. This is something that Natasha Iskander at New York University has studied very deeply and very interestingly. Meaning that those people who are coming back are somewhat less of a substitute for Mexican workers in the Mexican labor market. They have language skills, they have technical skills that they didn't have when they left, and that's something that public policy in Mexico could work to leverage. Yeah. And some of those efforts are what we've been discussing today.
Yeah, we're working on that. So we need to start wrapping up, but I want to go back to the original question about whether, how can migration reduce global inequality? Do you have recommendations to stay more optimistic in that sense?
We need just a huge amount of innovation in order to find these policies. I don't think most of them exist right now. Okay. When people conceive of migration policy as the degree of barrier, how many are we going to let in, and how high is the wall going to be? Very little migration policy is devoted to shaping flows of people for mutual benefit. And there are plenty of examples of that. I would highlight Canada's bilateral agreement with Mexico, New Zealand's bilateral agreement for low-skilled labor flows with bilateral agreements with several South Pacific island nations is something that's working very well. I talked about the potential for innovation on high-skill migration agreements for destination countries to partner with migrant origin countries to share the benefits and costs of skilled migration more equitably. But these are really, at best, incipient initiatives. There's very little innovation, and throwing up barriers runs directly in contradiction to innovation, because it makes it much more difficult for any new initiative trying to create a new way to shape migration to get off the ground. This is something that needs to be built. And here I often make an analogy to some of the biggest labor market changes in history, like women entering the labor force. Women entering the labor force was not an easy, simple thing. It came along with all kinds of problems. speaking of the United States, when women were just starting to work in factories and other forms of regular employment, lots of people had concerns about, is there going to be sexual harassment of the women? Who's going to take care of children, since that's something that they were traditionally doing? Sexual harassment laws had to be written.
Yeah.
So informal social norms had to be changed. Public and private networks of childcare centers had to be created and built and spread around and made affordable. That's something that took a very long time. It took a whole lot of innovation. It didn't happen overnight. It didn't happen automatically. And without those things, there were real problems with women entering the labor force,
yeah.
and there needed to be alternatives to the things that had traditionally been done by simply obliging them to do only work at home, by and large, and prevent them from accessing other things. This is the scale of innovation that we need at the international level. Whether or not migration is going to happen is not, I don't think it's worth having a serious discussion about that when we're talking, for example, about the 800 million young, energetic kids that are going to be entering the sub-Saharan African labor market. The only question is, are we going to develop the new institutions to take advantage of that potential as we developed the institutions to take the advantage of the vast potential of women coming to work, or are we just going to waste that potential by ensuring with barriers and walls and fences and at-sea interdictions that movement, which is definitely going to happen, happens on the worst conditions possible for everyone?
I guess this all comes back to we need attitudes to change as well as institutions, right? I mean, institutions matter. We need different attitudes.
One helps the other. It was about by developing, in the case of women entering the labor market, by developing institutions that allowed that power to be seized, so that people could start to see, well, that my lawyer is actually a woman, and it turned out she did a great job, and she has kids, and they seem fine too. That's when attitudes start to change, and it's through this this innovation at the margin, rather than hoping for some grand awakening among the populace. That's how this has always happened in the past. That's what's needed. That's the scale of what's needed for migration.
We need to end it here, but I would say that the seminar is called Migration, Inequality, and Public Policy, and I always stress that it's public policy, it's not immigration policy, right? It goes beyond. But I think with what you're mentioning right now, it's really clear that in the case of female labor participation, it's a whole range of institutions. So maybe we need to add the seminar on migration, equality, public policy, and attitudes to actually englobe everything and be more optimistic in that change.
They all touch each other, and there really is a reason for optimism. You could have sat in 1870 and think, well, we'll never change all these laws and institutions and create all these businesses, but that really did happen. It just took a while.
Well, hopefully we'll go faster. Thank you, Michael, for joining us at the seminar. Gracias por acompañarnos en el seminario de Migración, Desigualdad y Políticas Públicas, y los esperamos en una sesión más.